St. Thomas Aquinas recognizes that the government is there actually to encourage virtue. Statecraft is not about your the entertainment of your philosophical fancies. It's about doing things. It's about advancing the common good. It's about giving people the political conditions to flourish. Telling me that the problems that come from affiliation with really any Republican today are more difficult than the tension St. Thomas More encountered dealing with Henry VIII, who rips Christendom asunder? I don't think so, man. What you're being called to do, to run a country and to run the greatest country on earth, requires virtue. That's a great honor.
Welcome to Daring Greatly.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you, Michael. So today we have the exciting privilege of talking about Thomas Aquinas and Thomas More, the great philosopher of the Christian West, and also perhaps the greatest statesman of the Christian West. So why do people need to know more about Thomas More and Thomas Aquinas?
Well,
these guys?
It occurred to me the providence of picking these two at the same time is that Thomas means twin. So, and St. Thomas is actually my confirmation saint.
Really? Okay.
And in the mists of history, I can't recall if I meant Thomas the Apostle or St. Thomas Aquinas. I didn't mean Thomas More because I didn't know him then, but I know him now, and he's very important. And they're actually, both of these men are extraordinarily important for our time because we're living through an age that is beginning to see through the vapors and mists of liberalism, which have long surrounded us like a miasma. And they are beginning
What is a miasma?
We'll go back to Plato to talk about miasma, but just this fetid kind of stench. And we're now, I think, beginning to take more seriously the classical political tradition. And St. Thomas Aquinas has a lot to say about that, reading Aristotle through Christianity. And St. Thomas More has quite a lot to speak into our time because Thomas More was not only a brilliant thinker and philosopher, but he was a practical statesman and has rather practical advice for the statesmen of our times who don't merely want to live in an ivory tower, but actually want to have some effect on the polity.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that, I didn't actually think about the fact they're both named Thomas, which actually fits in with this whole kind of the mirrors for princes tradition and statesmanship very well, because really the whole idea, what Cicero called the shortcut to glory, was imitation of other great men. And you see this in Machiavelli, you see it all throughout the tradition. And so, yeah, fascinating. Also, I tend to think that when people take, a confirmation saint or a baptismal saint, they start to become not just like the one they pick, but like every other kind of saint who had the same name. So there certainly is that strong connection there. So these two men, they were about 300 years apart.
Yep.
Why don't we start with, Thomas Aquinas? So can you sketch just the basic details of Aquinas' life?
Yes. St. Thomas Aquinas is born in the early 13th century. He only lives 48, 49 years and fits quite a lot into that time. He's a rich kid, born into a very wealthy Italian family, and he is supposed to follow his uncle into the abbacy at Monte Cassino, the oldest Benedictine monastery. But he doesn't want to do that. He gets a different idea. He decides that he wants to join the Dominican order, which is in its youth. And the family says, no, this is not a good idea. So the Dominicans try to sneak him out of town so that he can go join the order. And the family catches him and they lock him up. They imprison him for a year. But he says, no, I'm going to be a Dominican. And he prays and he studies and he writes to the Dominicans, and they can't distract him. So the most infamous story of this imprisonment is that Thomas's brothers decide they're going to really get him off the path now. They're going to hire a hooker to go in and
seduce Thomas.
And according to I mean, I think this is in the record for his canonization. I mean, this is well attested to. He chases the prostitute out with some kind of torch, like a burning log.
Yes. Yeah. Does he? I think he actually even draws a cross, on the wall.
On the wall,
the ash.
Yes, and so at this point, the family basically gives up.
Yeah,
and Thomas's mother arranges this escape for Thomas, so that it doesn't look like they're totally caving to the Dominicans, but he gets out of Dodge, and it's good that he did, because he writes, I think, the most important work of theology ever, but many other works as well. We know St. Thomas because of the Summa Theologiae, which you could spend your whole life reading and still not really exhaust, and which St. Thomas, finishes, or nearly finishes, and then he has a mystical vision, and he comes back and famously says, "Everything I have written is straw." But he writes all these other important works on the Summa Contra Gentiles and on kingship, which is relevant for what we're talking about today. Shall we go further, or shall we pause?
Well, let's pause right here. So on the synthesis of sort of Aristotle and Christianity, had anyone else done that at the time? Was this totally, how did he encounter Aristotle? What was the reception? Very positive initially when he first wrote the Summa?
Well, the time period is important here because of the writings of Averroes. So you have Averroes, this radical Aristotelian writer,
Islamic writer,
against whom Thomas will write, and who features into actually all sorts of humanism that will be growing in the coming centuries. But St. Thomas Aquinas is writing, interpreting St. Augustine, baptizing Aristotle, from pagan antiquity, synthesizing even some Plato, and he's kind of bringing them all together. And some of the stories are that he's writing multiple books at the same time, and he really is probably the preeminent doctor of the church. So he is the scholastic par excellence. This is where the Enlightenment calumny that the scholastics were debating how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. This is mocking St. Thomas Aquinas, who's describing real questions. Are the angels obviously are not corporeal? So what does this mean? What's it mean for angels? How do angels communicate? How do these are questions that actually matter, that the dullards of the Enlightenment can't wrap their heads around. But he writes about everything. It's the Summa, and so he touches on politics as well, and he touches on politics in important ways that I think actually have a lot of relevance even to the American regime that will appear 500 years later.
Before we get to on kingship, because this is very specific advice for a ruler, a Christian prince or leader, is there anything on politics from the Summa that you think is worth noting?
Yes,
to frame this conversation.
Absolutely. Actually, St. Thomas's relevant political views for Americans today probably come more from the Summa than from on kingship. Because St. Thomas Aquinas says in the Summa that the ideal regime is a monarchy, but it's not just a monarchy. There's a king, but there's also an aristocratic element, and there's also a representation for the people. So you've got a harmony of all three types of regime.
Okay, so it's a mixed regime in a sense.
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't think I'm being too rosy that when I say, when you look at the American government, at least as it was supposed to function, I don't know if it still does, you see something strikingly similar to the regime that St. Thomas outlines in the Summa. You have the thumatic element of the American government in the presidency, which over the years has become less and sometimes more monarchical. Certainly by the time FDR comes around, it's rather monarchical. You have an aristocratic element and a representation for other noble elements. You see this in the representation for the states, or just in the way that other non-populist aspects of the polity are represented. And then, of course, you have a significant democratic element too, notably in the House of Representatives. So the founders and the framers, whether they're dealing with St. Thomas directly or merely through other writers. I mean, you're talking about one of the most influential thinkers that has ever lived, one of the most intelligent men who's ever lived. I can draw a fairly straight line from the political thought of St. Thomas Aquinas even to the American regime, imperfect though it may be.
Okay. And then with on kingship, I guess this kind of gets to a bigger question of whether, in your view, or in St. Thomas's view, kind of the fundamental virtues of a statesman, are those constant across regime types? Or to what extent is it unique or distinct based on the certain form of the regime?
Well, the purpose of the government is the same.
Okay. And what is that?
The purpose of the government is to establish peace.
Okay.
And you get peace through unity. And through peace and unity, men are able to attain their natural ends, their natural telos, and they can flourish in a natural way. Now, there's more to man's happiness than his natural happiness, as we know, and as St. Thomas Aquinas would certainly be aware of. Man also has supernatural ends. Man actually can never be happy if all he attains are his natural ends.
Yeah.
This is, in fact, the advice and the gift that St. Thomas is giving to the king of Cyprus, is it, in On Kingship, there was a notion that Aristotle advanced, which is that the reward for a good king is glory.
Yeah.
But sic transit gloria mundi, those glory. Why would you, the reward is something that is as fleeting as could be imagined. Yeah. I mean, it could pass in an instant. That doesn't seem like a very good reward. And furthermore, St. Thomas points out, if you seek glory, that actually diminishes your greatness of soul, your magnanimity. Yeah. So if you're really virtuous, you get glory. But if you desire glory, you're less virtuous. So you've got to be careful about these things. And in any case, St. Thomas says, no. No
glory.
No. Listen, King of Cyprus. And as he could write to, Congressman Joe Blow in America too, the government has a purpose. And there are better and worse forms of government. Sure. St. Thomas says that monarchy is better than other forms of government because the purpose of government is unity, and so the government's most unified when there's one guy running it. But nevertheless, the purpose of the government will remain the same. And so then why would anyone want to get involved? Why if there's
you're
no reward,
put your soul in peril and there's no earthly reward.
Yes.
Why get involved?
Yes. Yeah. And especially when you consider that the good regime is one that is for the common good, and the bad regime is one in which the rulers rule for private interest. Sure. So you don't even get a fancy watch out of it or something, or a nice car.
What is the common good for Aquinas?
So the common good is a misunderstood term in our liberal age because we tend to conflate it with collectivism or whatever, communism or something like that. But the common good can be known rationally, right? We know that certain things are better for us than other things. And so the common good is not, it's not like just, we put all of our stuff into a pot and we each take a little piece of it or something. The common good is not weighing the private interest of one and the private interest of another, and so that we get 70% his private interest and 30% his private interest. St. Thomas Aquinas is recognizing that there is such a thing as a summum bonum. There is a highest good who is God, and there are gradations of good, and there are practical goods, and so. In the liberal society might view the common good as you like chocolate ice cream, I like vanilla ice cream, and don't yuck my yum, man. We're going to have a chocolate swirl, and that'll be the common good. That's not the case for St. Thomas Aquinas. The good can be knowable. It is good for everyone, for the polity, for the constituent parts of the polity, and for the individuals.
And so is the common good, I guess, Cicero talks about it, right? It's putting the flourishing of the whole body politic above personal interest, above class interest, partisan interest. There's sort of this holistic element to it. But for St. Thomas, does that, the common good, does that exclusively refer to the temporal kind of goods that, or is this definition include beyond that to the eternal goods, or is that a distinction and there's something more than the common good? Does common good include the eternal salvation? Or
certainly, because for St. Thomas, we're talking about unity, and we're talking about wholes with integrity. So there's no firm separation of church and state or anything like that. Man is man, and man has certain ends, and these things can be knowable. So if it's true for you, it's probably true for me as well.
Okay.
And so, furthermore, St. Thomas would say that all Christian kings need to submit to the supreme pontiff, have to submit to the Pope, which raises interesting debates that Dante, not long after, about a half a century later, will raise. What in his tract Monarchia, what exactly is the relationship between the emperor and the Pope? Dante wants there to be a little bit more distance, but not a total separation. St. Thomas, however, and Dante's obviously a great admirer of St. Thomas, and St. Thomas appears in Dante's Paradise. But St. Thomas says quite clearly in On Kingship, no, the Christian princes are subject to the Supreme Pontiff. And
I'm wondering how effective you think St. Thomas's advice is about kind of the glory and honor related issue, right? And I bring that up just because, he says very clearly, and I think, in one sense, from a Christian point of view, it appears to be obviously true that, your rewards should not be in this earth, right? It's in the kingdom to come, and everything on this earth, it's temporal, it'll pass away, and a king cannot have, happiness in something that is passing or fleeting, right? So, okay, that makes sense. But
the nice cars are nice.
But what I found funny reading, and I discussed this yesterday with Erica Bacchiacchi, Christine de Pizan, who's a French medieval writer who wrote some Mirrors for Princes and Mirrors for Princesses, two different books, is I found it very amusing. And I think she knew that she was, writing for men, right? And so she would always begin with, you should be generous, or you should be humble, because, you're a good Christian and your reward is with God, and, you don't want to go to hell, and then, so she would always start there. But unlike Thomas Aquinas, that she'd go, but, if you're generous, people are really going to like you.
Yeah.
You're going to be very popular. And, you might also attain honor, and you might be celebrated. And then she would go immediately to the pagans and start telling stories about a Roman general who was very generous. And you could just tell how she perpetually moved from, do it for God.
But also, and in fairness, St. Thomas does something similar, at least, when he says, look, if you're a tyrant, people are going to get desperate.
Yeah.
And when people, if they have nothing to lose, they are more likely to rebel against you. These tyrannies are they're not going to be particularly long lasting. So there is a little self-interest that comes in there as well. However, yes, he is saying, look, your reward is going to be in heaven. And for a mind as clear as St. Thomas, that would be incontrovertible. That this is a persuasive argument. St. Thomas, another story relating to the hooker and the burning log, is that at that point he was given a special grace for perfect chastity. So he never had to deal with this issue again.
Okay.
And St. Thomas obviously had many special graces. So when I read on kingship, it is clearer to me that, of course, the glories of this world are a terrible reward. It's a terrible inducement to public life. Because I know for a fact we've all experienced, even if your experience of public life is having a Twitter account or an Instagram, you know that fads change, passions change, glories change so quickly. So, when we come to Thomas More, we'll see all the reasons why people might not want to get involved in public life, why people would like to avoid the court. But I feel that, I feel, what's it all for? Why do I...
Sure.
In fact, the only thing, ultimately, as long as I'm clear-headed about it, not being guided by my passions, the only thing that could draw me to Washington would be
for the
heavenly.
Yeah. And you see this in a slightly different way with when Charles de Gaulle kind of finds out that Churchill lost the prime ministership, and he sort of writes this letter to him, and he's basically describing how, it's something along the lines of like these ordinary times now post-war are not made for, people can't handle great men like you, and it's sort of, but even someone who's as great as Churchill, you would think, how does he lose the, the prime ministership?
Immediately.
Yeah. It's crazy. So there is this, the role, the providence or fortune, whatever it sort of gives and takes away. I also think there's probably a difference too so Christine de Pizan, for example, she is she is literally writing ballads at court. She is employed by all of these court, these royal families. And so, she has to, if she's going to keep writing, she has to keep her job. She has to keep the patronage up. So I think there's a sense of realpolitik that's sort of informing her writing.
Yep.
Or St. Thomas is, he's St. Thomas. Like he's
at his
a priest, he's in his monastery. So his advice is like, no, I'm going to focus on the salvation of souls. So you brought up the tyrant, right? And so probably one of the most shocking things reading on kingship is his understanding that a tyrant, now we would say, I don't know, it's basically that a tyrant is sent by God to punish the people for their sins, right?
Yeah.
And the proper response is sort of to endure your chastisement until God removes the tyrant. Pray, repent.
It's political victim blaming.
Yeah,
might say.
That's right.
But Thomas Aquinas is right about most things, so he's probably right about that too.
That's true.
So St. Thomas says, the tyrant comes as a punishment for your wickedness, and you have to endure it. Now, you're not obligated to obey the laws of the tyrant, the unjust laws of the tyrant, because an unjust law is no law at all. However, that he says pretty much stop there. You can not obey the laws that are unjust, but otherwise just stiff upper lip, suck it up. The tyrants come and go. It'll be a passing thing. So then the question becomes, well, what about revolution?
Yeah.
Can we revolt? And St. Thomas's answer is usually no. Usually, there are exceptions.
Sure.
And in those exceptions, the revolution ought to be led by subsidiary legitimate political powers. So we shouldn't all pick up pitchforks or, get all the Jacobins together and go slice off the Queen's head.
Yeah.
But so there is a mechanism for dealing politically with tyranny. But even that ought to be invoked cautiously. And why is he saying this? Is it because he hates liberty? Is it because he, has soft spot for tyrants? No, he's making a basic political observation that revolutions usually produce more evil than good. Revolutions usually upset the good of the body politic more than just suffering a tyranny for a period or having subsidiary political authority try to deal with it in an orderly way.
Okay. And so does he elaborate more? So in the acceptable situations for revolution, so in most cases, no. When you can do it, I think he says something about, it shouldn't just be an individual, like an assassin.
No.
Right?
No.
It's sort of the whole community, if there's a way through appropriate channels.
The whole community through appropriate channels. Not even, it's not even just the mob, all swarms up or they all take a vote on it or something. Yeah. It's got to be orderly and considered and slow. We have to be slow to do it because, one, because the civil authority is there for our own good, as we learn in St. Paul. Two, because the tyrants are sent by God to punish us for our sins. But three, because you don't want to make things worse.
Okay. So are there any other sort of, sort of fundamentals of statecraft that Thomas sort of reveals in this work that you think would actually have a bearing on a political leader today?
Yes, especially in our country coming out of, a liberal fog, and throughout the West coming out of a liberal fog, which is government is not always bad. The left thinks government should, give us our bottles in the morning and, should hold our hand at every step. No, that's not what we want.
Sure.
But government is not bad. Government is there for our good. We read in Scripture. And law is, according to St. Thomas, an ordinance of reason for the common good by him who has care of the community and promulgate it. So, it is for our good. And not only does there need to be law, there's a famous line of Dante, who I'm just always sort of thinking of Dante, I think it's in his invective against Italy. He says, Justinian fitted you with a rein, but the saddle is empty. And so the law, it's good to have the law, but if there's no one to enforce the law, it's no good. I mean, sometimes I fear conservatives fetishize the Constitution or even some lesser statutes. But Antonin Scalia put it very well. He said, look, the Constitution, it's a dead document. It's not a living document, it's a dead document. And there are two layers of meaning there. Okay. One is, no, it doesn't just naturally evolve over time, like the liberals say. But the other one is, it's just a piece of parchment that conveys ideas that have to be put into effect by statesmen, by governors. And so, unlike even St. Augustine's view of government, which is, don't make me sin, just curb some of the bad stuff. St. Thomas Aquinas recognizes that the government is there actually to encourage virtue, the basic, and with all sorts of limits around it, subsidiarity and all sorts of things, but it's to encourage virtue. So that not only do we say politics is downstream of culture, like the libertarians say, but we also say the law is a tutor, and so we want the reins, which are the bridle on human action, and we need someone in the saddle, and we need someone who's competent and who cares for the common good to be sitting in that saddle.
And so what are the, if you have a good ruler, a good regime, right, and they're working to not only inculcate virtue, but also to curb vice, which I think, Thomas obviously thinks is a good and suitable thing because, the government should be, to some extent, not only securing the temporal common good, but preparing you for eternal life. Yeah. What do you think are the limits, or what determines the limits on how much the government should minimize vice, right? So how far should it, what are the...
I mentioned Antonin Scalia recently.
Okay.
I remember he was asked a question once, which is, I think actually I was there. It was with a student group, much like ISI. I forget, which occasion it was. And we said, well, how do you determine the limits for gun control? Because we're saying, you're saying that certain weapons are excluded from protection from the Second Amendment, but there's a broad range of weapons that are included for protection. So how do we determine what that limit is? And Justice Scalia said, very carefully, which I love that answer, because St. Thomas addresses this in the Summa. He says, look, not everything that is bad and vicious is to be prohibited by law. And this is because not everyone is at an equal stage of virtue. So for the people who are really untutored in virtue and unpracticed, if you put too strenuous a hold on them, it's going to snap. If you put too much pressure on it, it's just going to snap. So my answer, perhaps this is unsatisfying, but I think this is basically St. Thomas's answer, is you make that determination very carefully, and the determination has to be connected to the virtue of the people. Our founding fathers in America and the founders wrote about the importance of civic virtue and a moral and religious people, to use John Adams's phrase. And it really matters because as virtue waxes or wanes, the law and the law enforcement are going to have to respond to that. Just to maintain order, lest the people totally crack up.
So another area that I think is worth focusing on is he's talking about ambition and the role of ambition in politics. And, basically, if you go back to Cicero, he says, one of the challenges with politics is the ambitious man wants to wield sole authority. And this poses some challenges, especially for constitutional orders. But Thomas kind of also talks about how ambition makes many men false, especially in politics. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, that's if you're in a monarchical situation, and you inherit kind of the throne. I guess maybe if you're thinking about ambition, maybe this could be in terms of acquisition of, imperial territories or perhaps other things that are more connected to pride. I think one of the challenges in our own system, right, is that especially in a system where a democratic system where the morals of the people are corroded, in order to win, in order to get power, in order to be the president, the governor, whatever, the senator, there is almost a built-in corrosive aspect because you have to appeal to the lowest common denominator to win, or at least that's the way it appears.
And you have to really want it. There was no draft Obama campaign. There was no draft Trump campaign. I think Trump was the best president of my lifetime, but he really wanted it. Talk about a man of ambition. This is a man with great ambition that I think he did use considerably toward the common good. But nonetheless, there it is. Yeah, that would appear to be a regime problem. I wish I had something nicer to say about it. I think what we all would long for in a statesman, certainly in a president, is a Cincinnatus. But the last time we had one of those was George Washington. And even that was a little dubious. I think he kind of wanted it too.
Yeah. And there was even a tradition of even if you wanted it, you had to pretend you didn't want it.
And then
eventually they would, pull you in and say, no, you're the guy, even though behind the scenes you were pulling all the levers.
Yes. I mean, the wisdom of La Rochefoucauld that hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue. And so at the conventions, it was seen as kind of obscene for the would-be nominee to really show up to the convention and try to politic around there. You would send your delegates instead to do it for you. Great scenes about this at the 1880 convention, which turned into total chaos because they didn't know, was it going to be U.S. Grant? Was it going to be this guy in New York? Well, it ends up being James Garfield, who no one ever thought it was going to be. But why was it so confusing? Well, because you didn't have primary campaigns as we do today, where the candidate really does go out there and demand your vote. So, yes, in a system where you're inheriting the crown, at the very least, there's a curb on the personal ambition that way. It's going to be this guy. Maybe his brother tries to kill him to take it or something, but it's going to fall on you. And so it is seen as a duty because the king is for the people, not the other way around. In a tyranny, the people are for the king, or for the dictator, the tyrant. But really, the king is supposed to be for the people. In our system, I don't really see any way to diminish ambition. The place of ambition in the political process seems only to have grown.
Yeah, and it almost by its nature has to be almost an all-consuming ambition. To think that you're going to spend, you're going to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Your entire family for a period of about 3 years, you're going to be on this lengthy campaign to victory, which might often just end in defeat, and book deals and, other ancillary benefits. But you're sitting in front of a camera hours a day talking about yourself, I mean, so it does pose some challenges. And I guess I'm curious whether you think, Patrick Deneen in one of his, talks at the National Conservatism Conference a couple of years ago talked about, it's time to use Machiavellian means for Aristotelian ends. Right. So is that something, I mean, is that possible, or are the Machiavellian means just inevitably corrosive of the virtuous ends, or is that just how you have to do it if you want to win?
Happily and providentially, I would probably curb my ambition back a little bit from Machiavelli to, say, Thomas More. Yes, okay, because Thomas More puts it in a more delicate way that I think is more palatable to more people, which is, says, look, you got the country you got. You go to war with the army you've got, not the army you want, and we live in the polity that we've got, not the polity we want. And so you have to accept certain political realities and do your best either to improve the situation or at the very least to mitigate how harmful it can be. So some have compared St. Thomas More to Machiavelli. I think he's got more virtue to recommend him. Not the virtù of Machiavelli, but real virtue. So if that's a Machiavellian approach, so be it. I prefer to call it, I don't know, what'd you call it? Aristotelian realism or something? Yeah. I'd take I'd keep myself at the Thomas More degree of ambition than the Machiavelli.
You're wary of the kind of this growing, I guess, popularity of Machiavelli, or sort of the focus on political power? Or do you think some interesting insights there about how things work, but as Christians, we need to have, Christian sources and that are really guiding us?
As an undergraduate, I really liked Machiavelli.
Okay.
In fact, I translated one of his plays that had not been translated for the English stage before. His play, The Girl from Andros, Landria, and which the Yale Italian department had pulled up, and said, hey, this is going to be your senior thesis. And I said, hold on. When I accepted this double major, I was told I didn't have to do a senior thesis. I said, well, you're going to translate it, but we'll put on the play. And Machiavelli was a playwright, in addition to being a politician, a political philosopher. And so I really got into Machiavelli. And I think there's a lot to recommend him. But the man's just irreligious. And I am not going to pursue the glories of this world and forfeit eternal glory. I think... because the other problem with Machiavelli is, you get 100 people you get 100 political thinkers in a room, and you ask them, what did Machiavelli think? And you get 100 different answers.
Yeah.
And then, Strauss just takes it to a whole new level. And that, you think Machiavelli is difficult to read. Strauss on Machiavelli is impossible to read. And so, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to even tell me which Machiavelli we're talking about.
Sure.
But I'd rather avoid all of that. Machiavelli is so difficult to understand, and St. Thomas Aquinas is so crystal clear. Give me Thomas Aquinas.
Very clear. Yeah, even reading him, I mean, it's just like the logic, the beauty of it, harmony.
David McCulloch says to write well is to think clearly, which is why it's so hard, and there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. So Thomas More then, 16th century England, how does he end up kind of getting into politics?
So, he's a statesman, lawyer, writer, he rises to a very high level in the court of Henry VIII, the Lord High Chancellor of England, very dedicated, devout Christian at a time when that meant one thing, in the West at least. But then, Henry VIII was involved in Christianity coming to mean all sorts of confused things. And so the famous line from St. Thomas More, who has all sorts of political positions. He goes out on diplomatic missions. He, serves as the Lord High Chancellor of England. He says, look, I'm not going to take the oath of supremacy. I'm not going to grant Henry your schism, and I'm not going to recognize your divorce. And which is kind of funny, because in Thomas More's Utopia, the utopians do have divorce, and they have euthanasia, and they have all sorts of things that are contrary to the faith. So that makes it a difficult book to understand exactly where Thomas More lands. But he says, sorry, man, I'm not going along with it. I die the king's loyal subject, and God's first. Beautifully put.
Last words.
Yes.
Powerful.
And then they kill him. And he becomes a saint. So he gets eternal glory.
There we go. And one of the things I love about the book Utopia, especially the first of the two books, is this conversation he's having with this fictional character named Raphael, but it's also a fictional Thomas More, and they're having this dialogue with each other. And there's this line where he's encouraging Raphael to enter the service of a king. You're such a wise philosopher, worldly man. Why don't you kind of enter the service of a king? And he basically says, there's no philosophy in the court of kings. And Thomas More kind of rebuts him a little bit and says, well, basically not your type of philosophy.
Yes.
But there is a type of philosophy for public life.
Yes.
So what is the relationship for Thomas More between the life of a philosopher and politics?
Well, here it's clear as day to me that the character of Thomas More in the Utopia is totally right.
Yeah.
And Raphael, I forget Raphael's last name, but Raphael's last name, it's all these Greek and Latin kind of words that mean, utopia means no place.
Yeah.
Though it's also a pun, because if you add an E to it, it means good place. And it's kind of a good place, but there's some things that are weird about it.
Yeah.
But at the very least, it doesn't exist. But Raphael's last name means nonsense spouter.
Yeah,
but he's Raphael is this wise sailor, a wise philosopher who goes on the voyages of Amerigo Vespucci, after whom our continents are named. And he ends up in this island and he learns all these ways, and then he ends up in Calcutta and he catches a ship back to Portugal, his native land. And anyway, he's seen the world, he's seen it all, and he makes a lot of good points. He says, oh, you want me to go into service at the court? I have all these political insights. You want me to go into service? But then the minute I get in there and I start speaking the truth, all the other courtiers are going to get jealous of me. First of all, they're going to get really insecure because I'm smarter than them and I know more. So they're going to try to cut me down. Only mediocrity exists in the court. I'm not going to flatter people. I'm going to tell the king that he can't do what he wants to do. And I'm going to tell the king that it's actually going to hurt him if he does what he wants to do. And the king's going to hate me for telling him the truth. And so what do I need that for? I get to live my life. I'm free of all these cares. And so no, there's no philosophy at the court. And St. Thomas More says, no, there is philosophy at the court, but not the kind you're talking about. Not all subjects are always suitable for being discussed at all times. And it immediately made me think of all the political nerds who, they get some face time with a politician and they start talking about how they want to, I don't know, repeal the 19th Amendment or something. Yeah. Oh, wouldn't that? And they'll make all sorts of really smart arguments for it. I think, man, we're trying to improve the ship of state here. We're trying to right the course of the ship of state. We're trying to do things that are practicable, that will be acknowledged as good by the people. You got to kind of meet people where they are. St. Thomas More says this. He says, you've got some highfalutin ideas. And who knows, maybe you're right about one of your highfalutin ideas, but the people totally reject it. Well, then, sorry, man. Statecraft is not about your the entertainment of your philosophical fancies, astute though they may be. It's about doing things. It's about advancing the common good. It's about giving people the political conditions to flourish. And so you can do philosophy in the court. You just have to be smart about it.
Yeah. And I love the way that he, he puts it basically saying that part of the reason the regime has declined so much is because philosophers are not willing to condescend to kings and offer their counsel. And I love the image he gives of, sort of the ship of state. You cannot, don't just imagine sort of this idealized system or policy, but really you can't abandon the ship in the storm just because you can't control the winds. You have to really get into the arena. If something is bad, make it as little bad as possible. And he really ended up. It's interesting that he ended up like living that out, to the point where he offered his head to really die on that principle.
Because the right is afflicted by this problem. Yeah. The right doesn't want to get its hands dirty. I'm talking about the intellectual and the academic right. They don't want to get their hands dirty a lot of the time. And I think this was a big driver of the Never Trump movement. Because Trump, he said vulgar things, and I would never, my tweed would be darkened by any affiliation with this man. And you think, hold on, you're telling me, first of all, in the case of someone like a Donald Trump, he's actually more, oddly enough, he's more coherently conservative than many Republicans of the last 100 years. But you're telling me that the problems that come from affiliation with really any Republican today are more difficult than the tensions St. Thomas More encountered dealing with Henry VIII, who rips Christendom asunder? I don't think so, man. And he wasn't afraid to get his head dirty. And by the way, his suit got a little darkened by the blood that, came out of his neck. Yeah. So, give me a break. I understand that the ivory tower it is pleasant, actually. And the convivio, the sitting around at a banquet is really lovely. I mean, there was a famous story about Barack Obama, who, while president, was at some fancy dinner. And the fancy dinner included intellectuals, and it was one of those things. And he said, how wonderful it is to sit here and talk about art and ideas, and tomorrow we have to go back to awful politics, and you thought, man, you could have been a professor. You could have been, but you don't recognize that what you're being called to do is actually greater. I like banquets, but what you're being called to do is greater, and it requires much greater virtue, actually, than just giving a lecture. That requires some virtue too. But what you're being called to do, to run a country and to run the greatest country on earth, requires virtue. that's a great honor. It requires an immense amount of intellect and practical virtue that's actually been cultivated through habit to do it well. Stop trading higher goods for lesser goods. I guess that's the problem of degradation and vice anyway.
So is the reasons why, maybe it's slightly less so today, but the reasons why kind of the intellectual right, especially in the last 48 years, has had sort of an allergy to politics, right? And to that kind of engagement, kind of getting in the arena, even with the risks involved. I mean, is that just, are they just kind of hearkening back to this old debate between Thomas More and Raphael? And is it just, okay, the intellectuals don't like politics because it's a little messy and they'd rather be left on their own to think? Is it just kind of the age-old tension between philosophy and politics? Or is there some particular reason why the intellectual right in America just got so comfortable in the ivory tower? What went on?
And there's a third issue, which is that politics has degraded. It actually has.
It has degraded.
I know we all talk about some ancient tablet that says, kids don't respect their parents and everyone's writing a book or something. But, these problems are perennial. But it has gotten worse, actually.
Okay.
The tenor of our politics has gotten worse. The attention span of the public has gotten worse because of technological issues, too. The temptation toward lower goods has gotten worse. Just the internet and pornography alone would account for a lot of that. So it is harder today. Education has gotten much worse. So it is harder for the philosopher to lower himself to, helping to run a country. And we've gotten a little bit comfortable. The right, because we lost the universities in the 60s, have built up all of these really amazing ancillary institutions and alternative institutions. And so it's great. It's lovely to hang around some of the think tanks and do all of that. We're in a beautiful alternative academic institution right now. Happily, though, one that is perhaps a little bit more interested in actually having a political effect. Sure. Not all of them are like that, unfortunately. So that's part of it. And it's just politics is kind of unpleasant in any age, and especially in a degraded age. I mean, the most popular presidential candidate in 2024 almost had his head blown off about 26 days ago, since from the day we're recording this. So I think, okay, hold on, I can sit around all day, and you're telling me I can either read great thinkers, and I can see my beautiful family, and I can make a decent amount of money, like anyone working in the private sector, and I can have some degree of privacy, and I can have and I can go home and play piano. I could do that. Or I could deal with vacuous imbeciles in public office and flatterers and schemers and sociopaths in Washington, D.C. I can make less money. I can have no privacy. I can receive basically no gratitude from anyone. I'm doing a largely thankless job. If I'm doing my job well, it's probably thankless because I'm making hard decisions that are extraordinary. I'm always irritating somebody in an effort to advance the common good. Another martini, please. Yeah. Where is my pate? I totally understand that, which is why, going back to St. Thomas Aquinas, I think you actually do need an inducement as great as the kingdom of God and marveling in eternity before the beatific vision to get someone to do it, because all the other incentives point to the more private life.
Yeah, this picks up on another theme that was discussed at ISI's Summer Honors Conference, which was that sort of paradoxically, when the church, when Christians abandon politics altogether, because they think it's too corrupted, right? Or because they have too much of a dualistic view. The irony is that they don't actually, basically the politics, it actually becomes more secular. It becomes more utopian without the hope of sort of this transformative Christian vision and engagement with politics. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And
it becomes harder to be Christian.
Yeah.
Because, religion is not a private endeavor.
Sure.
It's a public sort of thing. So it's in a country in which the barbarians are burning down your town and killing your family, it's harder to pray Yes, there's a greater urgency to pray, but it's harder to live out a religious life. So there's a political necessity. God, when St. Paul tells us that we have our rulers for our good, that's not just to mollify some emperor or something and say, hey, you're great.
Yeah, leave us alone.
We're cool, right? He's saying something that's true. Scripture is inerrant, according to Christians. So you believe that if you're a Christian. And I certainly do. So what is the good that the government does? Well, the government sets the conditions that allow us to attain our natural ends. And again, going back to St. Thomas Aquinas, creates the conditions that are conducive to our attaining our supernatural ends. And to take it even further back than St. Thomas Aquinas, we recognize that the incarnation itself, the greatest event in history, certainly the most consequential, even if you don't believe in it, you would say it's the most consequential, is God entering into history and politics. The traditional understanding by Christians is that in the fullness of time, in the reign of Caesar Augustus, who has jurisdiction over the whole earth, because the Gospel of Luke tells us that he sent out a tax, that all the world should be taxed, but he can only tax the whole world if he has jurisdiction over the whole world. In the fullness of time, in the Roman Empire formed by Aeneas, who marries Creusa in Troy, Dido in Carthage, and Lavinia in Italy, brings together the whole known world, the whole cosmos in one man, in the fullness of time, in the reign of a man who will be called the Prince of Peace because of the Pax Romana, under the reign of a man who will be called Filius Divi, the Son of the Divine, because the death of Julius Caesar was heralded by the brightest comet ever recorded, just as, and the ascent of Caesar, Augustus, just as the incarnation is heralded by a star in the east. Amazing providential scenes. We recognize that our Lord enters into history and politics, and the decisive event that redeems mankind, if you're a Christian. Well, actually redeems all of mankind, but you understand this if you accept Christianity, is the crucifixion, which is a political event, the just representative of Caesar. It's not even Herod. Herod sends him back to Pilate. Pilate's the representative of Caesar. Crucifies Christ to redeem mankind. It's a legitimate payment for man's sin because it's legal. It's not like someone, shivving you down an alleyway. It's a just authority with jurisdiction over all men, condemning the God made flesh to die to redeem all men. If you have that Christian vision, as St. Thomas Aquinas did, as St. Thomas More did, as all of us, most of us in the West did until rather recently, you recognize, politics in that sense is actually the medium in which our salvation occurs, and we can't ignore it.
Fascinating. I've never quite thought of it like that. And then you obviously see the audacity of Saints Peter and Paul, and even their drive to get to Rome, and kind of come before Caesar. I mentioned this in one of my other discussions. I was in Rome in March and, walking around the Roman Forum, and you see the glory of this pagan civilization, and all of the temple. I mean, if, it probably would have been staggeringly beautiful, right? Yeah. And ancient and old and, to your point about the rulers, thinking they were being even venerated as gods in their lifetime. So to think that you could be, a couple guys from Judea, and you're gonna make your way into the center of the cosmos, and you're going to proclaim that Christ is the only God, right?
Yeah. And that you'll win. By the way, that's the crazy. Yeah. I mean, you'll die, but you'll win.
But you win. Yeah. And then to think that they actually do win, right? And that every temple in the whole forum has a cross on top of it and becomes a church. But not even that. I was even pondering this a little more last night. I mean, this is almost too, if you just think of monotheism, like this is a polytheistic world. And then this is just like the kill shot. And it's just, in the West at least, right? It's basically over, polytheism. Because
the way that this is all taught now in the very pro-pagan, pro-classical, anti-Christian way is, look, and actually I think this is sort of fair. these pagans, they were welcoming. They're all about inclusion, diversity, and equity, man. Like they would have put up the Christian God in their pantheon of all the other gods. They're cool. But that's not what the Christians, that's not what Peter and Paul were doing.
Yeah.
No. All those gods go away.
Yeah.
Because they're false and lying, and we are going to worship the one true God. We're going to exclude falsehood. We're going to exclude things, notably these demons that you people worship, to in order to have a good society on our earth, and then ultimately to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And this is important for conservatives in America to remember, because even today we don't like excluding. We're afraid to exclude.
Sure.
Even we want to be kind of inclusive, but no, you have to exclude bad things if you want to pursue good things. You have to exclude falsehood if you want to grow in knowledge. And you have to exclude vice if you want to grow in virtue. And there's a delicate way to do it. Not all of us are called to exactly the same historical circumstances as Saints Peter and Paul. Very few people are. But in our own way, we can do that. And we need to at least have the spines and maybe some other anatomical features to actually do it, to proclaim the truth, and have the prudence to have a political effect.
And that is not possible without that transcendent vision, without that eternal reward. And it's things are, I think, really bad, degraded very, very to a terrible state in our modern West. But again, if you think of the odds that Peter and Paul faced in comparison to the odds that we face, I mean, it was the deck was stacked against them.
And also thinking of the Christian political vision, as we're talking about Saint Thomas, let's not forget how the deck looked in 732 at Poitiers when the Muslims were 150 miles outside of Paris and were about to conquer, within roughly a century of the founding of Islam. And then Charles the Hammer comes in against all odds and routs them. 1571, the Battle of Lepanto, the Battle of Vienna. These are kind of the three battles that the conservative Christians especially love to talk about. But the odds were against what was once called Christendom in each of those cases. And the victories of Christendom seem miraculous, actually. In Lepanto, we celebrate Our Lady of the Victory. We celebrate the Rosary, actually, because of this victory. But things have looked pretty dark before. And there's this joke about conservatives that, that the conservative pessimist is one who says things can't get any worse. And the conservative optimist says, oh, yes, they can. Yeah. So we're always doom and gloom about the fall of the West. But, God gives us bad things to try us. He gives us even tyrants to try us and to punish us for our sins. And he saves us. Eternally, certainly, but politically too. He does save us.
Yeah, and it's rather amusing that the favorite, and I like some of these books too, but the favorite kind of conservative book to write is, where did the train go off the tracks? And there's like a million, it's like the Enlightenment, or the when the German ideas came over and the start of the progressive movement, or whatever, the Reformation or the Enlightenment, or going all the way back to nominalism and Occam, and
that's a good one.
It's Richard Weaver.
It's the garden, actually.
The garden. Yeah, I think that's the right answer. So, what do you think about the So, if we kind of have a Thomistic or I don't know what you say about Thomas More. I guess it would also be Thomistic. Vision. Right. A Morean vision.
A more Thomistic vision.
A more Thomistic vision. Kind of, if we want to sort of reinvigorate not only the American populace with a greater sense of virtue, but kind of reorder our regime towards the common good, within the context of our constitutional structure. What lessons do More and Aquinas have for us right now?
First, I think we need to zoom even a little wider.
Okay.
And just think of the scholastics period.
Okay.
The scholastics had a great insight that even many modern conservatives today deny, which is that we can know things. We can actually know things. There are a lot of the liberals say we can't know anything, man. What is truth? It's all just private interest and, basically flexes of our libido that constitute our reason. But even many conservatives, especially Burkeans, and I consider myself substantially a Burkean, but they go so far into tradition. They recognize so clearly that we have a limited stock of reason that they actually underestimate their stock of reason. But we can know certain things. We can know that God exists. We can know that with certainty from the natural world by the light of human reason. We can know that some things are better than other things. We can know, actually looking through the tradition, we can know that some things tend to work better than other things in political life. And we can have the confidence to articulate that view and enforce that view. We don't, modern liberal society seems to have the worst of Raphael and Thomas More in Utopia. They actually want everything to be debated all the time, everywhere. But in God and Man at Yale, Buckley quotes a president of Yale, liberal even, who says, skepticism has utility only when it leads to conviction. So the scholastics, they are so certain that they can know things that they're mocked later on by the Enlightenment to say they're debating how many angels dance on the head of a pin. But okay, so we can know certain things.
Sure.
Okay. And we can know basically what's good for people and basically what's bad for people. And we need to remind, especially the left today, but also our dear libertarian friends, that when they tell us, Michael, who decides? Who decides what's good? Who are you to tell me that it's bad to shoot up a bunch of heroin and look at some porn and, I don't know, go streaking through the street? Who are you? And I say, who am I? I'm a simple citizen with I hope at least semi-functioning faculty of reason, with a moral conscience that is not totally atrophied. And that's when the Lebowski tells us, well, that's just your opinion, man. Yeah, that is just my opinion, man. But an opinion is a statement of fact from a certain perspective. And some people have better cultivated perspectives than others, but we all have some kind of conscience because the natural law is written on every human heart. So, okay. We can know things. We can know something about the regime. We can know something about man's ends. We can reason through what makes man happy. We can look at history as a guidebook for what does and does not make man happy. And if we are communicating at all, if we are able to convey ideas through percepts, because we're fleshy, so we got to have sounds and little jots of ink on paper. But if we can communicate, if our words are intelligible, then that means that there is such a thing as intelligibility. It means that there's a logic, actually, to the universe. It points, in my mind, to an intelligent creator of the universe. At the very least, though, we can recognize that we have minds and we have souls. I'm not just my body.
Yeah.
And so I have an end beyond political life. And maybe, actually, these things aren't totally opposed to one another. Maybe it all kind of fits together, man.
Yeah.
Maybe the fact that the cosmos is so finely tuned that any changes to any of the constants of the universe would just totally blow everything up. Not only would life not be possible, but like Saturn wouldn't be possible, Maybe it all kind of fits together. And in humility, we can take a step in the direction of reason and truth. And maybe we can get some help and guidance from our ancestors, many of whom did it a lot better than we're doing it right now.
Beautifully put. So, there's a bit of a debate, and I think the answer is kind of, both and, about, how exactly do we instantiate the common good, kind of building on what you just laid out there. Is it bottom up or is it top down, right? Is it local institutions, communities, homeschooling, classical schools, churches, the Benedict option sort of, or is it, do you need a sort of a more of a top-down approach?
The Justinian option.
Constantine option, right? And, I think that the reality is you both need good culture, but you also need good laws, and in one sense, it's not, so the culture is downstream of politics. There is a truth to it, but politics is also downstream of culture. And so it's to some extent, there's a both and to it. But I'm curious now because I think we can kind of all agree that you need the bottom up stuff. With the top down stuff, in terms of what that looks like today, I think one concern that has been expressed by Christians, certainly by social conservatives, is that, in the attempt to gain the victory that we need to kind of restore the moral order, to make this country great again, there has been at least in the short term, at least rhetorically, a sacrificing of kind of those, social conservative things that are based on natural law that you were just talking about. And so, do you think that sort of this shift, because in one sense, I very much welcome the conservatives and the Republican Party becoming the party of the working class, the party of middle America, the party of the people. This is, I think, a good thing, that it's sort of in opposition to the managerial elite and their values. So in one sense, that's really exciting, because I love the idea of kind of linking the the good statesmen with the people and fighting against the corrupt oligarchs.
I'm sensing a but coming.
Okay. So but what I'm wondering is, in doing what if the price of doing that is, I hope it would just be, maybe it's just a short-term backing off of the social conservatism to gain victory, because obviously you can't do anything if you lose, right? And then once you win, obviously there will be maybe a greater emphasis on the social conservative aspect, or maybe in the worst case, it's at least not as bad as what the left would do. So how do you think of that? Is that just a short-term play, or is there some concern that this could be a long-term, we're going to shunt you to the side?
There's a famous line from Horace, Odi profanum vulgus et archeo. I hate the vulgar hordes and I exclude them, which is not politically very productive. That is not an attitude. That is an attitude that some conservatives have, but I don't have it, and it's not gonna work. So what does that populism really mean? Yeah. And what does it mean even to be backing off the social issues? Well, clearly the GOP has backed off of the true meaning of marriage in recent years. We're now pretending that two fellas can be married or something. We haven't backed off the trans issue. We actually seem to be winning on the trans issue, which was the trans issue is just the logical next step after the marriage issue. Sure. Though that seems to elude some politicians. But obviously, if you say that there's no difference between men and women for the purpose of the fundamental political unit, then, well, okay, there's no difference between men and women for the purpose of the public bathroom either. But we seem to be winning on that. The conservatives won in Virginia, which is purple, kind of blue, actually, on the trans issue, and DeSantis won re-election in Florida, in large part on the trans issue. So, okay, the GOP's actually kind of dug in a little bit. We've stopped the movement. On abortion, the GOP has become much more pro-life in recent years, until the Dobbs decision. Then the GOP continued to become more pro-life in certain states, severely restricting abortion. And then there were ballot initiatives put up, and unfortunately the pro-abortion side started winning victories, and the Republicans went running scared, and they've tried to change their language. Though even the Republican nominee for president, who is largely responsible for Roe v. Wade being overruled after 49 years, even he has added this caveat to his looser language on abortion, where he says, look, we got to get elected. So, in a way, I give him some grace, because I think, look, you've been the most pro-life president ever. If you're going to use some slippery language in a tough election campaign, I still trust you more with the life issue than all of your predecessors who really were not as successful. But it's a fear. It gives me some pause, certainly. The way that conservatism, social conservatism, is going to bubble up again in changed political circumstances. Because the other thing is, talking about abortion pre-Dobbs is totally different from talking about abortion post-Dobbs. We're now in a different context. Are we going to change the party platform as a result? Probably we are, because just the earth moved underneath us for the good. It moved in a good way. Totally. But now we've got to respond to that. But probably a lot of that is some of that winning hearts and minds is going to have to take place at the cultural level. I think of an issue like surrogacy and IVF. Catholic Church is totally opposed, but certain other, even serious conservative Christians had supported it. Then the Southern Baptist Convention came out against IVF. After prominent Baptists in the country came out in support of IVF. Well, okay, now we've got the largest Protestant denomination in the country, plus the Catholics, plus a smattering of other groups. Okay, this is, and even the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention said, it's going to take some time because it's a new issue. Most people don't think about it. They think, look, my sister couldn't have a kid. She did IVF. She got someone to be the surrogate or whatever. And now that she has a kid, why is that bad? I totally sympathize. I understand why it's a novel technological problem. And so to work through the bioethical
various moral dimensions of it. Yeah.
I mean, to arrive at the, I think, inescapable conclusion that the problem with IVF and the surrogacy industry is they commoditize human life.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's human trafficking. But to arrive at that conclusion, it can seem abstract and difficult to get to. So even that, the leadership of the Baptists was saying, we're going to have to work on this for a little while. Okay, yeah, we are going to have to work on it for a little while. But then also think about, we were just talking about Dobbs. You had an elite impose abortion through Roe v.
The courts, yeah.
And that was preceded by something of a grassroots movement. At least Margaret Sanger was working on building up the numbers of the pro-abortion people. Then you have the elites impose it. Then you have a grassroots movement from the pro-lifers, often opposed by the leadership of the Republican Party that didn't want to deal with the issue anymore, just like they don't want to deal with marriage. And there's a grassroots issue, I think, even on marriage coming up. But the leadership didn't want to. The grassroots created enough pressure and enough incentives for the political class that then you, over enough time, had enough judges inserted so that the political elites were able to overrule Roe v. Wade. And so there's this dance. We were talking about St. Thomas Aquinas for a lot of this discussion. I once asked a Thomist, said, can you please explain to me the relationship between will and grace? Not the unfortunate 90s sitcom, but our free will and grace. And he, how does it work? This is actually a question that Dante asks to Marco of Lombardy in the Divine Comedy. How does it, does our destiny begin? Is it in the heavens or is it in our will? He says, my Thomist friend said, it's like a waltz. In a waltz, you're not even quite sure all the time who's leading the waltz. It's just, and so I feel that way about the political elite. Any real movement needs a focused, tiny, hardcore elite that is pushing it through. Because most people want to sip their drinks and watch the Yankees, and I want to do that too, right? But so you need a hardcore, concentrated elite that's pushing it, and you need broad grassroots support. And so I hate to cop out of the question, but we recognized at the beginning it's a both and. But they need to. It's not that they're both simultaneously doing the same thing. It's that they kind of have to dance together, like in a waltz. And the grassroots creates the incentives and the pressure for the elite to get their opportunity to push the political class, so that you're all kind of dancing. And if you ask me right now, do I think things are getting irretrievably worse or better? It's good that we're appealing to the working class, but it's bad that we're using mealy-mouthed language on the social issues. I actually feel relatively confident about not the social issues not completely falling apart, and I think that the strength that we get and the common sense, what Gramsci referred to as, the common sense that you needed to have an effective political movement, that you get by pulling in that working class. That's going to, it'll be easy to bring people who are broadly more reasonable than our political elites along on the social issues than to merely work with the elite. Because, by the way, the Beltway elites, even on the right, even on the conservative side, are huge squishes on the social issues. No one was happier when Obergefell came down than GOP consultants, because they didn't have to deal with defending marriage anymore. Yeah.
So to close, we're about out of time. If you're a college student today, involved with ISI, and you're thinking about kind of a career in public life, going into politics or public policy, what would you say are the chief takeaways from a Thomas Aquinas, from Thomas More, about that vocation for life in the public square?
Well, this is going to sound trite and alternately impossible. You do have to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Now, even if you're attracted to it for the wrong reasons, that's not a bad thing. Most kids who are interested in this, want to be president or something. And they want to be president so that they can have a presidential library and fly on a cool airplane and, I don't know, give big speeches or something. And those are not the right reasons to do it. But you can allow your desires to lead you toward things. And then you can, through education, make sure that your desires are rightly ordered. And so maybe that means when you come to see the insights of a Thomas Aquinas or Thomas More, you say, oh, hold on, I just get eternal glory and I don't actually get, like, it's not about the airplane. Never mind, I'm going to go work in private equity. Okay, maybe that's your conclusion. But for some people, well, I'll say this for me.
Sure.
I was attracted to politics because, I don't know, when I was 5 years old, I liked the politicians talking on TV. I don't know, I like Bob Dole running in 96.
That was my first actual political event, was going with my mother and grandmother to a Bob Dole rally.
Really?
In 1996 in Jackson, Michigan. Yeah.
I really liked it because all I knew about politics was, I mean, I always liked it. Even when I was a kid, one of the first songs I learned, my grandpa taught me, It's a Grand Old Flag, the George M. Cohan song. I loved it. I'd go march around singing it. He taught me George Bush's line, read my lips, no new taxes, which I would repeat. Unfortunately, George H.W. Bush did not repeat it, and so he ended up losing. But I just liked it. I liked that Bob Dole was a war hero, and that's all I really knew about him, but I liked him. And I was just attracted to politics.
Sure.
And through a little bit in college, really through some alternative groups, such as, like ISI, and then through my own personal education that came after those things, I came to a better sense of what politics is really about through encountering people like Saint Thomas. And I still and I actually like politics more now than I did back when it was just about giving big speeches and, I don't know,
fancy airplanes,
waving flags and fancy airplanes. I like it more. I think it matters more. And so, and this is an insight. We keep ramming Dante in here a little bit because I'm in town to speak about Dante. Dante has this notion, it's the way that the poem ends, that your will, your desire and your will, so like your higher will and your lower will, your appetites, are turned like a wheel being turned evenly by the love that moves the sun and the other stars. So they're being transformed. The journey that Dante takes in Purgatory is a journey of becoming truly free, in control of himself. Virgil says goodbye to him by saying, I crown you, I crown and mitre you, ruler over yourself. So you get this sense of and even, there's a famous poem of Dante that's not really from the comedy. It's Amor che nella mente mi ragiona. Love which reasons with me in my mind. And it's a revolutionary poem because he's saying love is a reasonable thing. And I say all of this because if you're a student and you find that you love something, you're attracted to something, that can be a good guide. And as long as you allow education to form you and shape you and you practice virtue and you discard vice, and then your love is actually probably more reliable than most of the, cockamamie rationalizations for, that you might come up with on a back of a napkin or something. You allow that to guide you. Don't suppress it. Just allow it to be sublimated toward the good.
We'll end there. Thanks for joining, Michael.
Thank you, sir. Good to be with you.